This month marks the 9th year that I've been part of the John Maxwell team. I'm one of what they call the founding partners, one of the first 100 people to sign up to be a John Maxwell coach. And part of the reason I bring that up today is because my primary word today is influence. Now, this is not necessarily part of the core values series, but it could fit in there. Influence, as we learned from John Maxwell, is the definition of leadership. In fact, the way John Maxwell says it, leadership, it's influence, nothing more and nothing less. Welcome to Leading Leaders Podcast, 5-minute videos, 5 days a week. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. I don't care what it is you're looking at in the world that we live in today, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's the political unrest, whether it's the fight for justice in the streets, whether it's the disorder in the courtrooms or the classrooms all across our country. The challenge that we find is this relationship between power and authority and those who feel like they have none. I had the honor last night of being a guest on American Muslim Radio, AM 360, and we talked for about an hour about the concept of influence. And most of it was in kind of a teaching format where there were a few comments and questions from the crowd, but most of it was just me teaching a philosophy, if you will, a framework around the idea of influence. Where does it come from? How do you build it? What do you do with it? And here's my basic, and I'm going to give it to you really basic in like 3.5 minutes as opposed to the hour I took last night. If you want more, send me a private message or an email, and I will make available to you the audio from last night's recording. It's one-sided because I only recorded myself, not everybody who called in. But here's the basic premise. I believe that leadership is a balanced wheel, and it has 5 primary spokes. And those 5 primary spokes are authority, respect, influence, impact, and story. And although influence seems to fall right in the middle of that wheel, meaning there are 2 before and 2 after, it really is the purpose of the wheel if you believe that leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. Here's what I mean by that. The simple statements in those 5 areas are authority. You cannot exhibit authority or exercise authority if you don't find yourself willing to submit to authority. Now, the contrast of that is in a family structure where you might have one person who makes all of the financial decisions and all of the discipline decisions in the home, and everyone kind of falls in line with that, whether it's by force or it's by choice, as opposed to in the classroom where the teacher has the authority because, well, they're the teacher, and the students fall in line because that person has authority. Or it's in a religious context or a governmental context. The person with the authority is usually pretty clearly defined, but where and how they exercise that authority determines the amount of authority they actually have. And whether or not they're under authority, meaning willing to be held accountable for the decisions they make, good or bad, that will determine how much authority they have to exercise, how much is given to them to be entrusted to them, and how much people receive from them. Next is respect. The key to respect is understanding it is a two-way street. Even parents have a really hard time demanding respect of their children, because if they don't respect their children, from the time that children are old enough to make a decision of what clothes they want to wear, what shoes they want to wear, what bed they want to sleep in, which direction they want their head to sleep in the bed, all of those decisions seem like really minor things, and for most parents, they just demand that it be a certain way. But there's a certain period where you've got to let your child make a decision and pay the price for bad decisions. Let them consequence. But respecting their ability to choose goes a long way in allowing them to respect you as they become teenagers. When they realize early on and repetitively that the decisions and choices you make with them or for them are for their own good, their own safety, their own security, their own prosperity, chances are they'll allow you to help make those decisions for much longer in life. And that's where influence comes in. See, it's one thing to dominate, to tyrannize, to force your control, to coerce, to corrupt, to control. to be the leader, to be in charge. That fry cook with the supervisor label on their shirt that just pounds into everybody, I am the fry supervisor. Well, you're not in charge of anything but french fries and salt, for heaven's sake, but your willingness to dominate and control everybody else is pretty profound. Well, what we're really talking about is influence that comes from people trusting you because they respect you. They see your authority. They realize that you are accountable. You will hold yourself accountable and you submit to someone else's authority. You respect them and their decisions, but you also expect respect in return. The biggest challenge with having influence is when people demand respect that they have not earned. Let that sink in for a minute because we see it all the time. Somebody gets a badge, and it doesn't matter if it says mall cop or federal law enforcement. They feel like the minute they have that badge, and especially if it comes with a sidearm, that they can just make everybody comply. They can force everybody to do everything. Well, if they're not under the authority of somebody else, if they're not willing to be accountable, if they're not willing to show respect to the citizens that they serve, then making those citizens submit in an unlawful way is not going to happen. That's not influence, that's a corrupt coercion. Now, the next level of this is impact. If you want to have an impact, you have to have influence. If you want to have influence, you have to have respect. If you want to have respect, you have to have authority. It's a direct flow. The amount of authority, the amount of respect, the amount of influence is a direct reflection of the amount of impact that you're going to have. Now, you can impact the people that you're close enough to yell at, to scream at, to touch, to force, to send to their bedroom, to smack with a belt or the back of your hand. You can have that kind of impact. But if you want to have a larger impact to a group of people that you've never personally met, then you're going to have a significantly higher level of influence, which comes from a significantly higher level of respect, which comes from a significantly higher level of authority. Now, when you follow all of that down, you come to what I call story power. And story power is a read-write program, meaning if I sit down and have a conversation with a 15-year-old who's in prison serving a life term for having killed somebody on the streets, chances are I'm going to hear things like, well, I had to earn my respect, or nobody was showing me any respect, or they dissed me, whether it's gang related or just some crazy civilian who stood up to a young buck with a gun in his hand. They dissed me, they disrespected me. And so here we are right back at the top. They are now under the authority of the state, possibly in prison for the rest of their life because of a lack of respect. And the only way they could gain the influence to make these people do what they wanted them to do was to threaten them with life. And when that threat didn't work, they carried out the action. And the impact they had is devastating, both to the life of the person they took, the family members that are now hurt. Same if a law enforcement officer gets out of control, doesn't submit to the law, doesn't respect the life of the individual or the laws that bind them, doesn't have the influence they want when they simply ask someone to comply, and so they take that to the next level and enforce it. Now they find themselves on trial. There's an impact to the family of the people that were lost, an impact to the family of the people on trial. The impact is enormous. But it's because authority, respect, and influence were out of whack. And now impact is having its toll right where we think. Now story power comes out because story is the story that you will tell that defines the journey that you've been on. And most of the time it starts with a lack of respect for authority and an inability to have the influence that they wish. As that story is playing out, here's something else I can tell you as an absolute fact. If we can begin to change the story in the hearts, minds, and mouths of young people 10 to 15 years old so that they don't see themselves as needing to fight at the end of a gun or the end of a stick or the end of a knife to gain respect, to gain authority, to build influence, the impact that they will have in life will be completely different. And the impact it will have on their life when they look in the mirror and tell a different story will be profound as well. My challenge to you as leaders is to understand that influencing people begins first with authority. This is not something you declare, I'm going to influence you. This is something you earn the right to do. If you want authority, submit to it. If you want respect, understand it's a two-way street. You better give it before you expect to get it. If you want to have influence, understand that is the key element of leadership. But influence is not coercion or control. It's when people trust you to follow the instructions that you give them. If You want to see an impact, grow your influence. The more influence you have, the more impact you have. And then guard your story, both the story you tell of the past you've had and the story you predict of the future you'll live. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day. Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.